20 years, and I particularly like working with students.
Okay, if Dr. Lopez can go next.
Okay, hello. I had to unmute my microphone. um, I am Dr. Stella Lopez. I've been at UTSA for, I guess about 28 years now. So I'm as old as the post, I guess. I was trained as a social and personality experimental psychologist. And I teach, most of you have been through my class, experimental psych class. And my research revolves around the areas in social perception that have to do with um, attributions and perceptions based on certain characteristics. I particularly like doing research about physical appearance and physical attractiveness and body image. I also have done some research on the area of stereotyping prejudice, and currently also working um, uh, uh, with some colleagues on issues of academic success and failure. And there I am. So here I am. So Dr. Lopez, okay. Oh, thank you, Tiana. That's very nice of you to say that.
And then Dr. Morrison.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be a part of this panel. Thanks for inviting me. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, so some of you might have taken my class in Intro to Clinical Psychology. If not, you can register in the spring. I'll be teaching it again then. And my research interests are in military health psychology. So I'm particularly interested in understanding the effects of trauma and war zone deployments in particular on functional recovery and co-occurring mental health disorders, looking at risk and resilience factors for post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, traumatic brain injury, as well as focusing on suicide prevention. And I do longitudinal studies, and I also do clinical trials where I'm invested in bringing best practice treatments to university campuses instead of expecting students to get to those treatments, which are really tricky to juggle getting to healthcare externally when you're trying to be a student and you often have a job and things like that. So I'm really interested in making best practices available and accessible to students, including student veterans, but also civilian students. So thanks for having me.
And I think Dr. Hale was not able to make it, so we'll just move on, but thank you.
Okay, so I'll be helping out and moderating the questions. So I wanted to start out with Dr. MC, if you can answer this question. How do I know if graduate school for psychology is right for me?
Boy, that's one I talk about a lot. And I tell people all the time that psychology is a little bit different. You know, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, you apply to school and you don't really have to specialize until the end. In psychology, you have to know what you want to do and then pick the program for you. So I urge students to think about where you want to end up working, what you want your job to be, what kind of setting, what kind of people, and then track back to PhD, social work. There's so many options. The thing about grad school is it takes time, it costs money, it's not easy. So you don't want to just do it because it's the next step. You want to really be sure that you're doing it because it's taking you somewhere you want to go.
Okay, and then I was wondering, I guess we'll just be going in order from each professor that we have here on our panel. Dr. Lopez, how would you answer that question?
Okay, how do I know if graduate school is right for me? I will honestly say when I was at that point, I really didn't know if I was going to go to graduate school. A lot of my classmates were applying to graduate school. I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to. And so I took a break. I had approximately a year off, and I wanted to see what options I had. And during the year that I was off, I guess towards the middle of that year, I then thought, yeah, I want to go to graduate school. As Dr. McNaughton Castle had said, you want to make sure that, and nothing's 100% sure, but it's kind of a personal journey for you. Um, you are investing in your future. You are trying to know who you're going to be. And it is a significant investment, and you want to know, is this the um, right path for me? For me, it was the point where I asked myself, when I'm really, really old, and whatever really, really old at that time, I thought old was like 70, but I asked myself, would I regret not having gone to get my master's and or um, my doctorate degree? And the answer was an overwhelming yes. I would have that regret. And that told me that, okay, then it's time to move forward. And then I started the process of looking what kind of graduate school I would apply to, and I did all the required things that you have to do. The other thing too now is that at this point in my life, when I look at students, and I know you're going through the same thing, what should I do after I get my bachelor's? What path should I take? Um, the one thing it's okay not to have all the answers to all the questions, and sometimes you don't even know until later on. And sometimes we do make the right decisions, and sometimes you find out later on, well, maybe I didn't make the right decision. I mean, you don't have all the answers, but you have to look at the jobs out there, and every job has always some psychology in it. And I know several doctorate students who have in psychology who have wonderful careers and jobs and occupations, not only in psychology, whether that be in research or in clinical practice, but also that's not in psychology. Several are doing other kinds of careers, not necessarily originating from that area. They had a solid psychology background. And the one thing that I'll emphasize in this panel talk is the fact that you really need to focus on skills. The skills that you learn in graduate school, particularly, are the skills that folks out there, employers out there, look for. And when you have those skills, you then apply for that job, or put your heart into that career, and things will be okay. So you don't really know. You need, like I said, you really need to know if graduate school is right for you. I guess right is not the word. I think I would choose if graduate school is the next step for you. And if it is, go forward. And if it isn't, figure out what your options are. And that's
Thank you. That was very insightful. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. No problem.
Well, I was wondering if maybe Dr. Morissette had something to add on to that question.
Sure. I wasn't sure if I should just jump in or if I should, I think a lot of what I have to say, and I'll be brief because I think that Dr. MC and Dr. Lopez have already said some really important things. The problem with this question that makes it so challenging is really because there's no one that can answer this question besides yourself. And so I want to draw upon a couple things that have been said already. One is that I strongly believe that graduate school is not for the faint of heart. You have to really want it because it's hard. It's really hard. But if you want it, it's worth it. The second thing is I really like, not to know if graduate school is right for me, but is the next step, because if it turns out that it isn't right for you, you can always change your mind. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind in life, is that you can make choices. And if the choices don't work out, you can change your mind. And the third thing that I wanted to comment on is, Dr. Lopez mentioned that she took a year off. I took 2 years off after graduate school, and that was particularly useful for me for a few reasons. One is I was able to get experiences that made my graduate school applications more competitive. And clinical psych programs are super competitive, frankly, more competitive than medical schools, simply because of supply and demand. There's fewer positions available for people to be accepted to. And so I took a year off and I did a few things to try to figure out, how do I be sure that graduate school is the right thing for me? So I did a research assistant paid position at Mass General Hospital to get a sense of the research aspect and whether that was something that I wanted to do. And I also knew that that was something that could make me competitive for graduate school. And then I also did some volunteer positions. I volunteered for a domestic violence shelter, and I volunteered for a suicide prevention hotline. And those are important experiences because it takes a fair bit of grit to work with difficult populations. And so I wanted to show myself that I could do it, but also show graduate schools in my applications that I could handle this, that, it's not easy to talk with people about some of the most challenging moments in their life, particularly when they're feeling suicidal. And so I was able to gain experiences in those areas. And for me, it helped confirm that I did want to go to graduate school. But I'll put out there that I have, for example, a lot of students that work in my lab. Some of them have gone on to graduate school, and some of them have not. And they said to me at the end, "I'm really sorry, Dr. Morris, that I just don't like this." And I look at them and I say, "Fantastic. That is a good outcome." You're probably wondering why I would respond that way. It's as important to know what you don't want to do as it is to know what you do want to do. And when they learned that they didn't want to do that, that was a good outcome, because you don't want to go to graduate school and get a degree that is not going to get you to the job or the place that you want to be.
Okay, yes.
Am I
love that
still
answer.
freezing? My video's kind of weird.
Yeah,
a
your
little
video
bit.
was freezing and the audio was off a little bit. I think it might be your internet, but I'm
Oh,
not
sorry.
sure. Okay.
Let's see if I can figure it out.
Call your
I
dog.
don't know. I don't know if maybe you wanted to try to disconnect and then rejoin. Maybe that would help.
Yeah. Did you get that answer, or was I rattling on for a long time? Hopefully,
Yeah,
I was
we got the
thinking
answer. It was
maybe you
just,
could hear my voice.
Yeah, I can hear it.
Okay, good. I'm going to check my internet.
Okay, sounds good.
I think I'm okay.
Yeah, so in the meantime, we can move on to the rest of the questions. And I think the rest of the panel will go this way, that we'll go through each question one by one, and everyone can chime in as they please, like regarding the answer they have to that question. So we can start with the next question, which is, how can I get involved with research on campus?
Well, now that you said we're going to go one by one, I'm looking ahead, and I really think question 2 and 3 are kind of together. It's hard to answer them without doing that. And there's 2 pieces to that. One is, if you want to go on to graduate school in a research program, if you liked experimental, if you want to do research, if you're interested in something like our master's program, you really want to do an independent study while you're an undergrad. And the way you do that is to actually approach professors. So you can look at the professors you have, and then you can also go online and look at the website for psychology, and it lists professors in their interest areas. And so you can see who you might be interested in working with. To do an independent study, though, you have to reach out to the faculty. They have to have room in their lab, and then you have to do paperwork to actually be able to enroll. So it's not something you can just pick. It's something you have to look at. Now, some people don't need an independent study. If you are thinking you really want to do an applied master's, school psych, LPC, social work, then I would urge you to do an internship instead. And that's also on the Psych department website. Dr. Acorn coordinates those, and you get course credit, but you are actually doing work in the field. And that's kind of what Dr. Morissette was just saying, is if you think you want to be a clinician, it's a good idea to go and work somewhere with hard people and make sure that's what you really want to do. Stella or Sandra, did you want to add anything in there?
I think that was a great response. I don't have anything particular to add.
I have just one thing to add. Whether you want to do independent study and get more research experience or do internship, um, this usually is prefaced by networking. Um, Networking means, you know, expanding your network and getting to know people. So for all those classes you've taken, let you know approach the professor, get to know them, they get to know you, not only of your academic performance, but perhaps what skills that you want to develop, or what skills you currently have. And then when later on, when you decide to do independent study and get some research experience or some applied experience, they can be somebody you approach for that. And you never know where your network can take you. So,
Thank you. I actually think that later on in the panel, we have another question that's related to that. But I wanted to ask it now, if possible. It's not on here, but it's about, because I feel like it's really useful. It's about obtaining like these connections and these networks, or reaching out to professors during the global pandemic, like how to do it in an authentic way. Because I feel like the online barrier makes it a little bit intimidating for students to reach out. And I was wondering if anyone had any opinions on that, like how to navigate the space that's different now.
Well, I've taken on a few students this semester, and I'll tell you that I get a lot of really different emails from students. And some of them are like one line, and they're like, "Are you taking students?" And I think to myself, I don't even know if you want to do what I do. And then there's other students who will send me their CV or resume, and they send me a paragraph and say, I've been looking at your research on the psychology website, and I understand that you do X, Y, and Z, and I really like to do that, and I want to gain more experience because I'm contemplating going to graduate school. Those are the kinds of emails that I pay attention to. And those are the emails that I think, you used a really good word, Elena, that are more authentic, because I want people, especially in what I do, I work with veterans, and there's a lot of, so to speak, showboating in terms of people wanting to get on the veteran bandwagon to just say, oh, I help veterans because it's a nice thing to do. But I want people who really have their heart in it. And so when those emails come through, I think to myself, all right, well, I'm really stretched right now, but maybe I can make room for that student. And I think about that carefully, because you can't take too many students in your lab, because then the training experience is diluted for everybody. But if there's a really good match and the student sees that and I see that, then I oftentimes, that's how opportunities and networking, the magic of networking, I think, happens better.
And I like the fact that you said authentic as well. And you can reach out to faculty for more reasons than questions about class or being in their lab. You can email faculty and say, I don't know much about IO, but could I talk to you about opportunities? We're really resources for students. And it kind of makes me sad that so many students never go to office hours and really don't get to know faculty. And when I talk to students, they always say either faculty are intimidating or I didn't want to bother them. But talking to students is part of our job. So you're not bothering us. And it's, for me at least, part of what makes it fun.
I think Dr. Morris and Dr. McNaughton Castle have said what I would say. So.
Okay, awesome. Those were great answers. So here we have our next set of answers, or questions rather. So I suppose we'll start off by what are the pros and cons of clinical psychology? And a lot of these are related to clinical psychology. So if you feel like you can answer like 2 in 1, or if that's something you want to do and just jump in, then feel free to do so.
You want to go, Sandra?
Either way, I mean, I feel like part of the answer to this question requires a few questions before the question. And the first question is really, why clinical psychology? And I think it's really important, before you can understand the pros and cons in a discipline, you have to understand the other disciplines that are options for you. So for example, UTSA has a master's in social work, or a doctoral program in social work. We have a master's that's a non-clinical program. There's an LPC program, and that's just at UTSA. I mean, there's programs like these across the nation, but really understanding first why clinical psychology before you can kind of dive deeper. And I would say that, clinical psychologists, and let's add psychiatry, by the way, to that list too, because it's a very different theoretical orientation. And you can also add counseling psychology, for that matter, to the list. So there's a lot of different options that you can have that can put you in working in a clinical environment. And then you have to figure out which of those options is most useful in terms of what you're most passionate about doing. So for example, if you're really a connector at heart and you want to bring resources to people and do consultation about and coordinating of services and such, to, because services can be really complicated and tough to navigate in hospital settings, especially, but also not just hospital settings, across communities in terms of resources. Well, then maybe social work is an option for you. If you want to do, an LPC, like LPCs are actually a really up and coming degree. And what I like about that degree is it's a licensable degree at the master's level that lets you practice independently. Whereas if you get a master's in clinical psychology, you cannot practice independently. And so the only reason, to my mind, of getting a master's in clinical psychology is if it's a springboard to something else, like you need to get better grades and demonstrate that you can do graduate level work, and that's going to bring you to a PhD program or something of that nature. So you have to kind of decide what discipline fits you best. Now, within clinical psychology specifically, I think one of the major cons is that it's not licensable at a master's level. You have to get the doctoral degree. It's a 5-year program, so it's a long program. Then you need to typically do a 1 to 2 year postdoc to get clinical hours to be eligible for licensure. And so there's sort of work beyond the graduate program to get licensed. And that's not uncommon. That's also true of our MD friends who want to be psychiatrists or other types of physicians. And so that's not uncommon, but you're in it for the long haul if you're getting a doctoral degree in clinical psych. What I would say are the main pros is there's so much you can do with the degree. So just even my own career, I've worked in hospital settings. I've worked in administrative hospital positions. I've done research. I've worked in administration for research. I've been a university professor. I've done consulting with law enforcement. I've done, there's so many different things that you can really build a career that fits what you think you're best at. And that's important because you have to, that's why they have you match your interest before you decide to go to graduate school. You have to go to the graduate school that teaches you what that you want to do. So for example, if you want a clinical degree, don't go to UTSA's PhD program in our department because it's not clinical. If you want to be an expert in schizophrenia, no matter how good Harvard is no use to you because they don't have faculty who do that. You have to figure out what you want to do, and then you have to align to that graduate school, and then they're going to teach you what the area, the elements of what you want to do, and then you can build that in multiple different ways: teaching, education, clinical, administrative, research. There's so many different things that you can do. I'll stop there.
Well, let me kind of pile on that. A lot of people get the message very early that clinical psych is sort of the pinnacle of psychology, and they just think, well, I want to get the best degree I can. But what they don't realize is that after you get in, I was a lot like Sandra. I had a master's degree in psych, and I took several years off working in a lab and got publications just to get in the clinical program. And then you have to do the internship afterwards. So, it was a long haul. And the other piece people don't realize is clinical programs are very much focused on research. You'll spend at least half your time in a clinical program doing research. And in fact, what I typically tell students is if you want a master's degree to get into clinical, don't do a master's in clinical for sure. Do a program like the one at UTSA, which is all stats and design and will get you in. The other thing, as Dr. Morissette talked about, Austin gets around 350 to 400 applications a year, and they take between 5 and 10 people. So you can't even apply with any sensitivity at all. The odds are many people apply one round and don't get in anywhere and have to wait a year and boost themselves up a little more. That said, if you But if you don't see yourself wanting to be an academic or in a hospital setting where you're really doing some research, you should look at the ID, which is an equivalent degree, which is and the last question on this list kind of takes me there too, because there isn't one best graduate school for psych. It's completely where is the right degree for you and the right people that you want to work with. So here in San Antonio, Our Lady of the Lake's the only place that has a PsyD. And then take that kind of thing into account. Counseling at UTSA, they do have a PhD, but it's not in straight counseling. It's in supervision and leadership, which is a really good degree for some people. It might not be for you. And if you're going to do any research degree at all, whether it's clinical or something else, you want to go backwards again. You want to find your interest area and then look up who are the people who are doing the research in that area and then see where they are and look for that direction of getting in. Stella, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just say I'm not from a clinical psych training background. I would say are a couple of things. First of all, know thyself. Know what you can do, what you cannot do, what you want to do, don't know how, and everything else. I know everybody thinks, it seems to me sometimes that everybody thinks of clinical psychology, that's the golden apex. You need to understand there are other areas in psychology that are just as prolific, productive, satisfying, and all that. The thing is, you need to be flexible. So do that, and you gain your you get into it, and maybe it's not what you want. So you go to counseling or social work or a PsyD or anything like that. And maybe it's okay, but then you get sidetracked by something else. Somebody found out that you're good with data management and wants you to do some volunteer work on managing a set of data. And you do that, and they're very impressed with your work. And that path kind of takes you to the area of data science. And you find out you're good at it. Maybe you should be a data scientist. And, then deal with data that have to do with studies in clinical psychology. I mean, what you can do. Just also think of failure as feedback because you will fail sometimes. But there's a lot of choices. There is so many choices. And psychology is a degree that I think that can be applied for anything. That's all I'm going to say right now.
Even at the undergrad level, a lot of positions in the business world, like a psych background, HR, PR, communications, advertising, they like people who are interested in communication and how people behave. So there's a couple of books out there, just as a shout out, APA, resources they put out for students. And one I recommend to everybody is called Career Paths in Psychology. Be sure you get the most recent edition though. It talks about what they do, how that's great. If you're kind of thinking, well, I'm in that boat of clinical and counseling, I'm not sure. APA puts out a book every year called The Insider's Guide to Graduate. Great descriptions of the different programs. It breaks it down, why you would want a master's versus a PhD in different areas. It also has information on how to apply to grad school. And I've had students come back from interviews and tell me that they were asked questions that were in that chapter in the book. So they were so glad they had read it and thought about an answer before they were put on the spot. So both of those books I would definitely check out if you're in the stage of trying to decide.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the wonderful answers and for putting the books in the chat. That was helpful too. I will pass on the panel to the next moderator, Alexis.
Mm-hmm.
Just a quick intro. I'm Alexis Gutierrez, and then I'm the volunteer coordinator. These are going to be the next slide of questions. The first one being, how do I prepare for graduate school as a psychology major? If Dr. MC, if you'd like to start off.
It comes down to the currency, and in academics, that is GPA, test scores, and research experience. So you want to get the best GPA you can. Kind of a rule of thumb is a 3.0 will get you into a master's program. If you don't have a 3.0, you don't have to panic. A lot of schools now will look at your last 60 hours, which usually is your major, your junior, senior year. And they might take a 3.2. But for a lot of students, it's that first couple of years when they were in the wrong major or the wrong school or whatever, that their GPA wasn't good. There's also schools that are flexible. Here in town, both Texas A&M San Antonio and Our Lady of the Lake say in their materials for their master's program that they don't go solely on GPA. They're also interested in experience. Now, you also have to look at the actual program. If you wanted to do the master's in psych at UTSA, you, in non-COVID years, need to do the GRE. Right now, it is recommended but not required. But a lot of LPC and other programs never require the GRE. So you need to do that. And if you did an internship, if you did independent study, You're going to need those things to kind of bolster your application, and also to get the letters of rec, because schools usually want 2 or 3 letters of recommendation. It's almost like when you apply to college. You know, you need the letters, the GPA, the test, and on the application, they always want to know what else you did besides study. So you guys are all ahead of the game anyway, because being in the Psych Club is a nice thing to slot into that little place on the application and say, yeah, I did get involved. I did do some things on campus. But to some degree, it's a game, and you have to really take a look at how your record matches up with the programs. Dr. Morissette alluded to the fact, though, that if you don't have the GPA you want for the program you want to go to, there are workarounds. You could do a master's. If you want to go to a PhD program straight out of undergrad, really the requirements just ramp up. They usually want a GPA more in the 3.5 to 3.8 range. They might require different GRE cutoffs, but books like the Insider's Guide, and there are other books and websites out there, usually will tell you not just their minimum requirement, but often it will list what the average scores were of people who got accepted in the past. So if it says you need a 3.2, but everybody who got in last year had a 3.7 or better, that's important to know. So you want to really do your research. And when I'm advising students, I tell them that when you start looking at graduate programs, you need a spreadsheet. You need to fill out all the columns, because it's going to get confusing and merge back and forth. So create a whole spreadsheet, and then when you're starting to decide where to apply, it's all there in one place.
Oh, I be still my beating heart. I love spreadsheets. Let me add to that. The spreadsheet, you need a detailed spreadsheet, but it's not a bad idea to send your letter writers. I want to expand on this letter of recommendation, because a lot of questions come up. And in fact, I just had a student contact me about this today, about questions about letters of recommendation. It's good to send a list of all the schools that you're applying to the person who's writing your letters. And because they're going to get links, and they need to make sure and cross-check that they received all the links to the programs that you're applying. And so that can be very helpful to be very organized, and they will appreciate that. And they're the ones writing your letters. So you want a good letter and they want to write a good letter for very organized students. So let me dive in a little bit on the letters of recommendation, because I had somebody today saying that he was having trouble finding professors because they had since left UTSA, and then wanted to know if I, as interim chair, could write a letter of recommendation on his behalf. And I had to respond to him very honestly and say, my letter isn't going to really carry a lot of weight. It will check a box off in terms of the typical 3 letters that you need, but you want these 3 letters of recommendation to be really strong. These are people who are vouching for you. These are people who are saying that you have what it takes to do graduate level work. These are people who are saying that you have what it takes to work with clinical populations, that you can write, that you know how to analyze data. They'll talk about your strengths. They'll talk about your weaknesses. They really need to know you. And that's where it's really important to have independent studies with professors, or to show up at their office hours. I've written letters for students in my classes, like my intro to clinical. Students often want a letter, but those are the students that I can write the best letters for if they've showed up to my office hours, if they've asked good questions in class, if they've showed me that they know how to engage in critical thinking, because those are the qualitative things that I can speak to in the letter, instead of just writing, dear members of the application review committee, so-and-so is a student at UTSA who has a high GPA. They are a psychology major. They're interested in applying to your school. Sincerely, Dr. Morissette. Versus, so-and-so has been working in my lab. They've gained this really good research experience. They're conscientious, they're detail-oriented, they're reliable, they show up on time, they complete their tests, they learned how to do assessments, they learned how to consent participants, or whatever it happens to be that you're doing in the lab. You can see already that that's a richer, more powerful letter. People want to know what your experiences are, because the more that you've been trained in at an undergraduate level, the less they have to train you in from scratch at a graduate level. So you can hit the ground running as a graduate student and really do important work in graduate school. So those letters are super important. Make sure you're building relationships with faculty. Stella, to you.
Just to build off what Dr. Morris had said, that's what I was talking about networking. You know, just to get to know another person is a goal in and of itself. So when you're taking a class and go to the professor's office hours, if they tell you to get out because they're busy, okay, fine, at least you tried. But more likely, they'll talk to you, we'll talk to you, and say, I'd like to know more about graduate school. I'm not quite sure what to do after I get my bachelor's. I mean, that's a wonderful way to get to know the professor. Maybe the professor says, well, have you taken experimental? How'd you do? And would you, I have a spot in my research lab. Maybe you can sign up for independent study, and then you can get some research experience. You never know what will happen when you connect with another person. The idea about letters of recommendation is I also get, as Dr. Morissette has indicated, I also get some emails about, please write me a letter. And I don't remember anything about this student because we have large classes. I don't remember connecting. My letter would probably be like that, what Dr. Morissette would say. Yeah, this person took this class and did well, as opposed to if I knew the student, if they had been involved somehow with, if in research or with the student organization, if I was the advisor, if there was something that I could write more than, yes, this was a student in my class, that would be a better letter of recommendation. It would be weighted more. They'll know you a little bit more than just, yeah, this was a student in my class. So that's what I just want to say.
Okay, great. Thank you for those responses. I'm going to move on to this other question. Is there a difference between completing graduate school online or on campus? I can't decide which is best for me and whether I even have a choice during this pandemic. Dr. Lopez, if you'd want to start that.
Okay. I know there's this pandemic, so we're, one of the many challenges of living in this pandemic, of course, is, the question you have there. I really am in favor of on campus. There's so much richer experiences when you go on campus as opposed to online. But considering the fact that we're in this pandemic, you may not have a choice but just to go online. Or if you are willing to wait until the pandemic is over, and then you can attend, hopefully, and get accepted to graduate school where you can go on campus. But besides that, deciding which graduate school is best for you, it's a lot of other things aside from whether it's online or on campus. And it's a stuff that I think Dr. Morrison and Dr. McDonald and Castle also mentioned. I mean, is it an area you're interested in? What are the options that they have available for you? what are you aiming for? What are some opportunities? What are some resources they have? And so forth and so on. But to, again, ask whether online or on campus is better, I think, again, my personal preference is on campus. And I would, if I was a student right now and I'd like to go on campus graduate school, but there's this pandemic, I'll wait. I'll wait till the pandemic is over. It's got to end. So it may end in 2 years, but it will end, and I'll go to graduate school then. So in the meantime, I'm going to volunteer, get some experience, do any of that stuff. So
I also think it really matters on what kind of program it is. So, you know, there are business programs, education programs, where you're not really doing a lot of hands-on research, and you might be able to do the classes and the learning and the writing. I think if you want to do research, it's kind of hard to do all of that virtually and really get the whole experience, especially in psych. And it's also an issue if you're in a clinical or a counseling program, because there are requirements for how many hours of supervised therapy you do before you graduate. And as Dr. Morset said, there's also often a requirement after you graduate, even in the master's levels program. My daughter's in her 4th year of a clinical program, and of course it got interrupted last year by COVID. She had been doing testing in an autism treatment center, but in March, the hospital stopped bringing any kids in. So for the rest of her rotation, March to August, instead of doing hands-on clinical work, they basically had her writing online reports to knock down the backlog of things and doing a few online sessions with adults that her supervisor watched. I understand why they did it. The pandemic, we have no choice. Do I think she got the same benefit she would have if she'd been able to finish that rotation? Probably not. So it really does depend on what you're trying to do.
Did you have anything to add, Dr. Morrison?
You know, I think those fully addressed it, and I've been kind of focusing on chats with letters. There's some follow-up questions with letters of recommendation, but yeah, I think they've covered it.
Okay, great. The next question is going to be, is it better to look, oh, I'm sorry. Actually, Elena, did you want to say something? Sorry about that.
Yes, no, it's okay. I wanted to say that we're nearing 6:30, but I was wondering if our panelists would be okay with maybe staying till like 6:45 or 7, because we have, I suppose, a lot of questions that people are interested in.
I assume it was going to be up till 7, so I'm okay.
I think that's what I was told, so we're good so far.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. So on to the next question then. Is it better to look into a dual program where you get your master's than your doctorates?
It all depends on what you can get into. Some PhD programs, you get the master's on the way. Other programs require a master's before you can even apply to the PhD. It varies in what field you're in. So I don't think there's a better. I think it's back to what Dr. Morset and Lopez has both said about what's the best fit for what you want to do. You know, in my case, I went straight into a PhD program. Turned out I didn't like it very much. I got a master's. I got out and worked a couple years, went back into a PhD program. The master's got me in. It didn't get me any time, you know, didn't buy out any time in the PhD. So, you know, you just don't 100% know. And you have to think what it is you want to end up with.
Yeah, those programs are really competitive when you have the master's en route to a PhD. And, you know, that's fine to do it that way. I think, you know, it works well and it flows well. I think it's also fine to get your master's first, especially if you need to bring up your grades. But also, like, so for example, I had a student in our master's program, which is a non-clinical master's program, and that was really beneficial for him because He wanted to get the quantitative skills that he wasn't necessarily going to get in the clinical program. You have to think about this logistically. Clinical programs have to teach you about patient care. They have to teach you all the content. They have to, you have to do your research. You have to often you're teaching and things like that. So there's only so much you can get done in the timeline of even 5 years, which sounds like a lot of time, but that's everything that you need to do your whole profession. So it's kind of not a lot of time either. And so what was really nice, and I've heard this from other master's students, is they got the really strong quantitative skills in our master's program. And then two master's students, one went on to a PsyD program because she really wanted the clinical. But she had the background in the quantitative to strengthen what she could do in the clinical program, and the same thing. Now, I don't know if her credits transferred, but in the second master's student who went on to the UT Tyler clinical psychology program, many of our courses counted toward his PhD. You can't count on that, but when they can accept your credits, typically I think they try to do that in good faith, but they also have to make sure that they're training you in what they think is most important to train you in. So if they don't take your credits, it's because they don't think that you've gotten the training that they believe is most important for you to get in their degree program. So you can do it both ways. You don't have to go sort of en route for your master's to PhD. You can do them separately. And sometimes there's important reasons and strategy to do it that way.
Dr. Lopez, would you like to add anything?
Nope. I think that was well said.
Okay, no problem. Our next slide is the first question is going to be, from your experience inside the psychology field, what qualities do successful individuals possess?
Curiosity. You have to be curious about everything. You have to really be willing to look at people separately from the way you see the world. You can't impose your worldview and say, why are they doing that? You have to look at it and say, I wonder what it is about their experience, their life, their biological makeup. That you have to think in ways that are very different from how we often approach life.
Anyone else want to add?
I will
talk about flexibility.
Oh yeah. Right. Well, I would say it's not I would say it's not just success in the psychology field. These are characteristics that help you be successful in life. Again, the first thing is know thyself. Then focus on skills. Always think that you can learn this stuff, that you don't know everything, and so you want to learn something. You need to be humble. You need also to be open to a lot of experiences, and also to say that the path to whatever it is that you want may not be that direct, but maybe it's through different routes. A long time ago, in a galaxy far away, when I was the GAR of the master's program, there was a graduate student who he successfully graduated from our program, but he was wanting to go to another professor's lab, and this time it was his third professor. And I had a serious talk about him, and I said, well, what ultimately do you want to do? And he said, I want to go into clinical. And I said, okay, you have to do some research. And he says, yes, but I want to do clinical research on this topic. And I knew that the previous professors that he was under and left and went to the next professor didn't really address that topic. And then finally I said, have you ever considered the fact that to get where you want to be, you cannot take the main road? That maybe you need to go through this route, and it's not obvious. There's no face value that this will ever take you to what you want to do, but it is. You just don't know it. Have you ever considered that maybe this is what you need to do first, and doors will open, and that will lead you to what it is that you exactly want to do? And I could see from his face that he never really considered that. Um, and so he thought about it, and we worked things out, and he did fine, and he successfully graduated, and he's a very successful psychologist right now. So it's you got to be flexible. There are no straight answers. You got to know yourself. You got to want to learn. You got to do what you can do, and that's pretty much life. That's all I'm going to say.
Good answer. I'll add, I think the qualities that I look out for when I'm, reading essays or looking at experiences or interviewing students or whatnot are a combination of, I guess what I'll label, there's probably so many different constructs that you could use to label this, which is a real psychologist thing to say. But it's really a combination, I think, of openness and grit. I think you have to be open to hearing other people and understanding their perspectives, which are going to be really, really different from your own. And also open to feedback and to learning about your own self and your own perspectives in a way that's non-defensive. I often share an article with my students in my lab and my doctoral students. It's called The Importance of Stupidity in Research. And I think that's really important, because when you choose a career of research, you're fundamentally choosing a career of not knowing, which for many people is a very vulnerable position to be in this position of sort of always not knowing. And that's where, if you can flip it on its head, it brings you to Dr. MC's belief that it's so important to be curious, because you have to be open and curious. And then I add the piece of grit, because if I let it get under my skin, every manuscript that got rejected, and every grant that got rejected, and every sort of the patient that I couldn't get better, I would have left the field a long time ago. Because you really need a thick skin. It's hard work. And that's okay. That's what I love about it too. And the sort of striving to get better, but that's the grit, is to sort of strive to get better and to tolerate the uncertainty and so forth. So openness and grit, but also flexibility and curiosity, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those are really good responses. Our next question is going to be if you guys know any good resources to find internships.
The psychology department website, Internships. We have a list of places where students have gone. Now you can find others, but you also have to know that for a psych internship, it's not going to be like shadowing a doctor. A therapist isn't going to let you go and sit in on all of their sessions. So I recommend that you look for places that do have some kind of training model, like the suicide hotlines or the battered women's shelter or the children's bereavement center or the Roy Moss youth alternatives. You're not going to be doing direct therapy, but you're going to be working with people who have real problems and seeing what that's like and seeing how people interact with them.
Well, the other thing I want to say to that question is something that Dr. Morissette had mentioned in the first couple of questions we had, and that is volunteer. And there's so many things to volunteer for. And you don't have to officially wait for internship to sign up for internship to volunteer. Maybe you like volunteering for the boys club or the any of the Sam shelter or anything like that. You don't wait for the semester that you'll have to register for internship in order to get into volunteer work. Well, do it now. What are you interested in? What are you particularly curious about? And then when it's time to sign up for internship, then maybe the folks you know in the places you volunteered in can tell you that, yeah, sure, well, you can get credit for this. Well, you've already made your mark here, and we'd like to have you here. That would be great. So
I couldn't agree more. And I just want to put in a plug that you shouldn't just be a volunteer to get into graduate school. Be lifelong volunteers. I mean, I still volunteer at organizations, and I bring along my kids with me because I want to teach them to be lifelong volunteers. There's so much need in the world that there's every opportunity to give back. I put a comment in the chat that Dr. Acorn is our internship coordinator, but right now with COVID, we don't have any internships because of safety restrictions. So the way that you're going to get this experience is by volunteering. And I promise you, you will get more out of it than you will give. You will get more than you give when you volunteer.
Well, and once we get back to normal, the Psych Club has a long history of offering volunteer opportunities at the state hospital and the children's shelter. And even last semester pivoted and did some things where people were doing online letters to elderly folks and other people. So there's lots of ways to think about it.
Yeah, we're still doing all of that. So if you want more information, let me know.
Well, the other thing too I want to say about volunteer is you can get involved in volunteer work based on your skills. So if you're really good in computers, for example, or you really like computer programming, and there are places where they need help on things like computer file management or programming, or teaching seniors how to use computers or anything like that. Start with what you're interested in and see if there's some way you can share your talent or skill to a nonprofit organization.
Thank you. I'm going to jump ahead to this other question. I thought it was kind of fun. If you had the choice to be any other career, what would it have been?
That's a good one. I come from a long family of teachers, so I always assumed I would have become a high school teacher. But when I think about what I really like to do, I could see myself as a research librarian because I like tracking down things, or some kind of reporter. I really like to write. So I don't know how that would have all translated, but by high school, I knew I liked psychology. I had no idea what grad school was or any of those things then, but I really was kind of always pointed this way because I'm so interested in why people do what they do.
Interesting. Thank you. If any of you want to add?
Let me add.
Go, Stella. Dr. Lopez.
Oh, okay. Why don't you go ahead? You go first.
I don't know that I have a great answer. All I know is I wanted to be a veterinarian, and then I couldn't draw blood, so I nixed it. And then I've wanted to be a psychologist ever since.
All right. That's funny. Okay. Well, I think I have 3 that I would. Now, even though if this is an if question, if you had the choice to be any other career, it doesn't mean it'll never happen. I'm talking about possibly could still do this. The first one nowadays, it didn't exist in my time when I was younger, but now a data analyst. I would love to do that as a career, just that. Second is like Dr. MC, I come from a family of teachers. I'd probably still be teaching. Third is something that Dr. MC also mentioned. I guess we're so like-minded, is that a librarian. In fact, some of our librarians at UTSA have a background in psychology. They have a master's in psychology because of not just the organizational skills that people tell me I have, but because I'm curious to see how things are cataloged, curious about different types of information, and the library is the perfect place to find it. Of course, I'm still the mind that I don't Google it all the time. I go to a library. And the last one is something that have nothing to do with psychology, and that is I would love to just be a photographer, work for National Geographics and go to places and try to capture pictures of the world and other people and all that. That's what I would have done. Could still do.
Very interesting.
Me too. I wanted to be a veterinarian in high school. And, but yeah, next slide, I'll move it on to Elena to present.
Hi, my name is Elena Suarez. I'm the secretary of Student Psychology Association. Thank you guys so much for coming out. We appreciate you so much. I'm going to go ahead and start with the first question. What do graduate school admission teams look for in their applicants?
We kind of covered this when we were talking about preparing. Usually they have some hard cutoffs. If you don't have the right GPA or GRE, they might not even look at the rest of your application. But after you get in that first pool, it can range. They probably will look at the letters of rec. They'll look to see what it says about your attitude. A lot of times when we get that electronic letter of rec, they want us to write a letter, but they also have a list of checkoff things. Is this person responsible? Are they ethical? Do they work hard? Do they take criticism? So all those things can fit in. And PhD programs, not so much master's programs, might even invite you to an interview. And sometimes that's a series of one-on-one interviews. I also know of graduate programs where you do a group interview where they ask a number of students to be in a circle answering questions with one or two professors. So that again is where some of the research comes in, figuring out what the programs you're applying to look for.
I'll just add briefly to that. I think that's a really good, solid response in terms of the broad, overarching perspective that people are evaluating the applications on multiple levels. But what I'll say beyond that is at a certain point, you have a lot of applications with a lot of smart people. And smart people in some worlds are a dime a dozen. And I don't mean that. I hope you interpret that the right way. There's a lot of smart people in the world. So then your task is to try to figure out, how do I make myself stand out? And that's where I think your letters become so important, because once they know you're smart, you've made that benchmark. Then they want to see who are you as a person, and they're going to look at your self-statement. And they're going to look at how insightful you are. And they're going to, the self-statements are about your experience, but also how you've grown, and sort of telling them exactly why this is the next right step for you. You have to convince them in a way. And then the letters really help you shine, because those are professionals in the field who are vouching for you and your character, and that you can do the work.
Dr. Lopez, would you like to add anything to that?
Oh no, I think Dr. Morissette, Dr. MC have said what I would say.
Perfect. Our next question is, any advice to students who are unsure about which career path to take?
You know, I talk about this a lot, and I think we've touched on it. And also the next question about being indecisive. It's not a race. Everyone comes into college thinking all the people around them know exactly what they're doing. They're going to barrel through in the least possible time and have a career. Sometimes you don't know what you want to do, and you do have to take some time to figure it out. So if you don't know, don't just headlong go into grad school. You might a year off to relax, calm down, save some money, and explore your options can be a really good choice. And really look around, talk to every professor, everyone you know, and get information, because there's lots of things you can do with psych that you just don't know. You know, based on TV, this is what TV makes psychologists look like: ineffective, unethical therapists, or people who work for the FBI and profile folks with crime, who do crimes. They show very little about anything that real psychologists do.
Sorry, I was sending out the sign out sheet. Does anybody else want to add anything to that question?
You know, I just want to add that there's a lot of focus right now on improving diversity in graduate programs. UTSA is a Hispanic serving institution, and coming from a Hispanic serving institution gives you a lot of strength, because they really want to improve their diversity. And that's diversity by race and ethnicity and gender and sexual orientation, and, you know, name, you know, all the different areas of diversity. That can be a real strength for you. So I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten from other programs around the nation, and I've been forwarding them to Dr. MC, and then also Dr. Swan for Psych, and all the different Dr. Hale for Association of Black Psychologists. And because these universities are seeking diverse candidates. So use that as a strength. It's very good news for you all.
And make sure you work it in. Don't count on them to just know your last name. If you have any experience with diversity, write it into your statement of purpose. Emphasize how it influenced your choice to go to their school, because they are looking for it. So you want to optimize that when you're trying to sell yourself as a candidate to them.
Absolutely.
Our next question is, what is the best advice? Oh, we went into the next slide? Okay. That's good. Yeah, because I don't want to, we can go on to the next slide. What do job opportunities look like for aspiring therapists, counselors, and do we have to start out working for someone or an organization before opening up our own practice?
Depends on how fast you want to get paid. So private practice takes a long time to build up enough clients to fill up 40 hours a week. And insurance companies pay notoriously slowly. It's just like doctor's insurance. Sometimes 3-6 months down the road before you get paid for services you did before. So what a lot of people do is they go into an organization, whether that is someone else's psychology service or hospital or a clinic. And then they start doing a little bit of private practice at night or on the weekend. You build up till you're well known enough by patients and also by people in the community, so they'll refer to you, and then you make the jump that way. So it's kind of hard to just open the door. But what I've also found, and it still works for me, is a lot of therapists who pay rent on an office full-time during the week would love to have you sublet it for a couple evenings a week or a Saturday. So it's not that hard to find a place to do that while you're ramping up.
Those are good points. And I'll just add that a couple of logistical things that you need to think about with doing full-time private practice is that you don't have your own health insurance. So if your personal situation is that you have medical conditions or certain types of things, you might very well want to work with an established organization that can provide healthcare benefits, because that can be a real quality of life issue for people. So something to think about.
And companies do hire therapists for well-being programs, for employee assistance programs. The counselors at UTSA and our counseling center, a lot of them are master's folks. So there's a variety of opportunities out there. The other thing I'll just throw out, this is a different discussion, but you have to make a decision. Are you going to bill insurance? And if so, it's complicated. And are you going to try to figure it out? Or are you going to pay someone to do it for you? And if you're not going to take insurance, then that means a lot of people aren't going to be able to see you. So you have to invest in advertising and being in a place where people can pay the full amount. And there's some other stuff too. You know, not only do I have to pay rent on the office, I have to have malpractice on the my own practice. I also have to have business insurance. Things add up. So, you know, it's like running a business in some ways.
Dr. Lopez, did you want to add anything to that one?
I have no experience in in clinical practice, so you're talking to the two experts here. So.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next question. What are some good psychology jobs to pursue with a bachelor's in psych?
Take it away, Dr. Lopez.
Just because it has no clinical psych stuff in it, you're throwing that question at me.
Exactly.
Just sharing.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. There's a lot of jobs with a bachelor's in psychology. Of course, you would be a little bit limited because you are competing with other graduates with other degrees. But for example, if you, and again, by the time you have your bachelor's, you probably had some internships, some research experience outside of a structured course. You perhaps helped a professor with their presentation or their paper, or you've written up reports. What I would say is focus on your skills. What skills do you have? You know, you're good with computers, you're good with analyzing numbers, you're good with organization, putting together themes in the literature review, you're good at writing technically because you wrote papers in experimental psychology and you wrote papers when you did independent study in a research lab. You're very good at coordinating certain things. Just focus on your skills and sell your skills. And you never know. They'll hire you. And then you start thinking, well, okay, I'm good at this skill. They want me. I got this job, and maybe I need to further develop this skill. Maybe I need to go to graduate school and see what else other skills I could learn. So.
And sometimes companies will pay you or pay at least your tuition for you to go. So that's another route as well.
I'll give you a very simple example. There was a nonprofit organization that knew an undergraduate who volunteered for them and found out that they were in our program UTSA, and you may not know this, but well you may know this, but some nonprofit organization collect data. So they've asked the student if he could look at their data, and the student asked me, should I do that? I said, sure, why not? And he said, well, can you look at it with me? I said, sure. So we did. The nonprofit organization gave him the data. We looked at it, and I figured what to do. It's your very simple t-test analysis. And I waited for that student to figure out how to analyze the data, and he came up with a solution. And I said, go right ahead and do it. He did it. He organize the results. And I told him, when you talk about the results to them, talk about what it means for them. And so he did, and he got paid. They loved him. They loved what he did, and they paid him. And there we go. He's a consultant for them, based on his experience in the undergraduate program. So
that's great. Another thing you might think about, some of you, is the whole field of behavior therapy. It is a booming field, and you can get certified to work with, for example, kids with autism with the bachelor's degree. There's sort of a hierarchy of skills you can get, but that's a way you can get paid for working in the psych field using some of your undergrad training.
I'll just add that I had the privilege of going to a fundraising event last year, and I was talking to some of the donors, and they were in the business field, and they said, we love hiring students who do social sciences and humanities because they have more in depth in terms of the thinking through concepts and people. And a lot of jobs, the psychology degree is so relevant to, because you're working with people. You don't have to be doing therapy. But there's business jobs in environments where they want people who know how to understand human purchasing, like what makes them click and like things, and what makes them want to buy things, and advertising and HR, and finding people who are going to match a particular job, or so job placement kinds of things, or there's so many different things that involve people. You just have to sort of scan, and you can go on like probably LinkedIn or apps like that, where you can search up different types of jobs, and it will maybe even give you ideas, because the hardest part about figuring out what you want to do is that there are so many choices. And so you have to then figure out, well, what am I not thinking about as much as what I am thinking about?
And don't forget our career services. They're there for you while you're in school, but you can use them as an alumni too. And sometimes they have interesting ideas. I got in an Uber in Seattle last year with a young man who was working for, I think it was Google. But anyways, he had a history degree, and he said he was getting promoted faster than some of the cyber folks because they couldn't write and couldn't communicate.
Mhm.
And his history degree was what his boss needed, someone to pull it all together. So you just never know.
Yeah, and there are companies and organizations, and they are wanting so much to hire people who can look at information and translate that to them with regards to how they relate to their consumers, their customers, their clientele. And that's something we do as psychologists. So, I would say, when you're looking for a job, whether you have a bachelor's or a master's or PhD, and this is what I use in my class, operationally define who you are, what can you do? And they will see that, hey, you can do that. Well, I need somebody who can do that. And there we go. You'll get your connection.
Well, Stella, you could also mention Dr. Mr. Lopez. Classic example.
Yeah, he could. Dr. Ray Lopez has a PhD in neuroscience. At that time, it was called biological psychology. He has a PhD, and he has a whole story that he could tell you. But now he is in the path that he took. But he did a postdoc and found out, kind of came to a self-awareness that there was too much competition, that he couldn't live another 20 years on a postdoc with $20,000. And so he volunteered. And he volunteered teaching seniors about computers because he loved computers. And it was run by a bunch of military people who saw his talents and hired him to do a website. This was a long time ago in a galaxy far away. The website for a medical lab in Fort Sam, and that website still exists. It's been revised, but it started with him, and it went on. And he was offered a job, and he will tell you that um, he was offered a job and said, by our now very good friend, and he said that I'd like to hire you because of basically your skill, and I can only offer you $70,000. Is that okay?
And
You
you're
know,
sitting there.
and Dr. Ray Lopez at that time was a postdoc who was earning $22,000 a year.
And what was your starting salary at that time?
Yeah, right. So he said, well, I can only offer you $70,000 a year. So he'll tell you that not only did it took him 2 seconds to say yes, it took him 2 seconds to say, hell yes, I'll take it. So and so forth and so on. And there are other things about his career, but now he works for IBM as a lot of things. He's an analyst, a software engineer. He is a course developer for Coursera. You can find that in the web. And he also worked for the artificial intelligence of Watson. So you never know where it will take you. So be open.
I'm going to go ahead and skip to the last question. What is the first thing that we should do in our graduate school application process?
Get organized. It's a rite of passage to get those applications done and all coordinated with all the letters, and get yourself in, get people in line who are going to review your statement, because you might think that you have written the best self-statement ever, and they read it and they're like, what? I don't get this. So you have to have outside perspective and feedback. Don't let it be perfect before you get that feedback, because you're going to get feedback no matter how perfect it is. That's, so see if there are faculty who can review your personal statements, or friends or colleagues, or, people that but fundamentally it's a labor of organization.
Yep.
It's a lot of work, but you got to get it started.
Mm-hmm.
You know how they say about writing, in order to write a book, you have to start with a paragraph or even a sentence. That's the same thing here. To get this going, start something and get organized, as Dr. Morissette says.
Well, and since I have my sticker on, let me also say vote, because we need politicians that put more money into education, into grants, into funding, into research. We know it's all important, and you all need those opportunities. So don't sit it out and say, oh, what happens at the governmental level won't affect me personally, because it will. If you go to grad school, if you pick a career. A lot of students talk to me the average state school got 68% of its funding from the state legislature. Today, it is in the 20s. So what did they do? The state said, we're not putting money into the schools, we're broke. And the schools said, we can't run without money, so you guys are paying it. So go vote. That's my other first, before you get organized on your applications.
Okay, well, I guess if there's nothing else to add, we can go ahead and open the floor to Q&A, Elena, if you want to.
Yeah, so with these last few minutes that we have, if anyone has a specific question that they'd like to ask, they can send it in the chat, or they can unmute themselves and just ask out loud. But now would be a good time for that.
I just like to say that this was very organized. I appreciate it. I'm not sure, did you record it? Did you guys record it as a?
Yes, I did record it.
Good, because it seems to me like, this would be a useful resource for students who couldn't come or going forward.
Yes, I will be sharing it on our YouTube channel, just so everybody knows.
Good.
There's a question in the chat about neuropsychology, and neuropsychology is typically embedded within clinical psychology programs, and then there's specific requirements that you need to meet. So if you're interested in neuropsychology, you really have to find a program that does that, and you have to get the specific training in your doctoral program. You need a specific number of hours on internships. So typically there's a year-long internship placement that must be focused on neuropsychology as well. And then often there's a postdoctoral fellowship to gain additional hours of experience for neuropsychology. So it's very specialized as a discipline.
And it's different than biological or physiological psych, which is studying the brain. Neuropsych is a very particular area where you learn to do testing, assessment, planning, diagnosis of people who have psychological issues that largely have some kind of organic basis, like autism.
Yeah.
APA has different divisions. There's a division of neuropsych. It has information for students, so you can go and look there.
And the same's true. There's a chat in about developmental psychology, and the same is true for that. You need to just find programs that do that. And then I would say that if you get volunteer experiences, make sure they're kid focused or family focused or whatnot, because then you want to really track in a programs. And when you do an adult program, you might get some minor experience with kids, but it's primarily focused on adult. Or if you do a kid program, you can get some background experience in adults, but it's primarily focused on kids and families. So, and then also Dr. MC, they're wondering if that was your cat.
That was sort of my cat. It is my daughter's cat. So we have 3 and she has 2. And she was gone last weekend and we watched them and she hasn't picked them up yet. So our 3 boy cats and her 2 girl cats are running around chasing each other. But yeah, I think that was Juno that went by.
One last thing about the developmental psychology. If you're interested in developmental psychology, when we're talking about the lifespan, there's a lot of generations now that are living longer. There's a lot we don't know about gerontology, and that might be an area that you might want to be a pioneer in. Just a suggestion.
Also, school psychology, which often gets confused with school counseling. The school counselor is the guidance person that you saw in high school. School psych is kind of a school-based version of neuropsychology. And there's a lot online for that. UTSA has a master's program, and APA says it's one of the fastest growing fields in psych. So that's something else to do some research on.
I have a question. Can you hear me? Okay. So how many of your letters of recommendation need to come from like your professors? Because like I'm planning on taking a semester or 2 off, like some people take a year or 2 off. Is it, and so say I like volunteer somewhere or work somewhere and get some experience, are letters of recommendation good from those people, or do I need to just maintain the relationships with my professors for the next however many semesters I take off? Does that make sense?
Both. Do both.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Just drop an email to your professor periodically. Hey, I'm doing this. Wanted to let you know. Think I'm applying next year. If you have a mentor that will answer you back, that's a good thing, even if you don't end up needing the letter.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. And before that, make sure you do independent study with them and show them what you can do in the lab, and there would be that basis of data for them too about you.
I had a student who was an undergrad in my classes when we got here in 1994, and she stayed in touch with me, got a PhD from Austin, went in the military, came out and worked, 20 some years later, she still checks in and I'm still interested to hear where her career is. So, if you find someone you're interested in, stay in touch with them.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, this was amazing. Thank you so much for participating and just answering the questions that our members had. We had got so many questions submitted, but we could only pick a few. So thank you so much, and hopefully we can do this again to get all of the questions answered.
Thank you so much, everybody, for this. This turned out fantastic. Thank you all the professors that were able to show up.
Yes, and thank you to our amazing moderators. Y'all did great.
That's true.
Very proud, and put it on your resume when you're applying to school.
Yep.
Not only were you an officer, but you moderated, you organized, you planned. Take credit for all of it.
Yes.
Also, this is going to bother me if I don't do it. I'm no, sorry if I interrupted you.
Yeah.
No, you're good. I might
I
have
was going to say that in the beginning, I didn't introduce myself and I realized that everyone else did. So I'm sorry. I'm Elena Koretsky. I'm the advertising chair.
Well, I'm glad that you did that. It's a very important skill to say a few sentences about yourself, like a little elevator speech, because that's a PR thing that you'll be doing on interviews, whether for jobs or graduate school. You have to have a little sort of blurb about, who you are and what you want to do. So those can be important for interviews. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, good luck
Yeah,
to
thank
all
you.
of you. And maybe eventually we'll be in person again, but I'm so glad you're continuing with online and not letting the club just fall by the wayside. This is important kind of information.
Agreed.
Take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.